I'm presenting the project which we've done for Clean Clothes campaign. It's a European international network which try to fight for better labor conditions and wages in done for brand garment sector. I don't have much time, so I'll try to be quick. So the context of the research, first of all, that Ukrainian garment sector, it exists, but it's not that big as, for example, in Bangladesh or other classical production country, mostly in Asia. So our official numbers are there. It's like 4.3% of enterprises and 3.5% of industrial employment. But because of the huge informal sector, we assume that it is far bigger and can be more than 3,000 enterprises and at least 140,000 workers employed, and maybe more. It is very, this sector is even more prone to informalization, and some authors conclude that no more than 10% of Ukrainian apparel production work fully within legal framework, which doesn't mean they are totally in informal economy, but they have some aspects of informality. Almost every factory has this aspect. This sector in Ukraine is definitely export-oriented, and according to some estimation, the majority of factories do use toll manufacturing and cut-make trim schemas, which mean they work for export as suppliers. It's not a huge part of the total export production, but it's partly because it's a very low added value stage of the production, usually in every production country and in Ukraine too. Main export destinations are Germany, the main one, but Hungary, Poland, and Romania have 20%, which they don't have their big own brands. So our conclusion is that Ukrainian factories here play the role not of the suppliers, direct suppliers, but rather subcontractors of suppliers of Western European brands. So some brands which do produce in Ukraine, it's totally not the full list, it's just what you can get from open sources like brand supplier list and some other sources like factory web pages. So research settings, we totally researched 8 factories in different parts of the country, in 7 different regions. It's more or less looks like that, the map of the research. They all are formal factories, and it is important here because there can be also informal, and conditions can be different there. They employ 100 to 700 people and allocated in very different settings, starting from urban type settlement to big cities. And 3 of these cities, 3 of the factories are located in administrative centers of their region. Here comes the difference with the conventional production countries, though as in those countries the majority of workers are women, but not like in Asian countries. They're usually of older age, so the average age of interviewed workers was 45, while in some Asian countries you cannot get to the factory if you are over 25. Most of these people are from this settlement or from the nearby villages, so it's not a migrant labor force. And for this reason, we can conclude that their vulnerability is not reinforced by their identity, ethnicity, or detachment from their home community. So turning to the main findings, what also different from traditional Asian production countries, it's a relative security which they have. So it's usually buildings which were built still during Soviet times and which were built as factories. So they were designed as factories. They sometimes are renovated. All of these people have termless contracts, but again, I'm speaking only about formal factories. We have not researched informal workshops and other things. They have quite a diversified social package, but it can be problematized because of the crisis. The social package devaluated very much because of inflation and everything. But they have a paid annual leave, paid health leave, they have unemployment benefits, they have pension, and so on. There are many trade unions, mostly from the Federation of Trade Unions of Ukraine, or private unions which were created by owners of the factories, but they are all yellow unions, so they do nothing even in the cases of direct violation of the Ukrainian law. So, and here go similarities with classical production countries with a lot of problems, like concerning labor conditions, that, for example, heat in summer can be up to 40 degrees at the factory, and it is precisely summer when they have high season of orders, when they have a lot of orders, and they have to stay at the factory like 10, 12 hours per day, 6 days per week, sometimes till morning. So extreme overtime is another big issue. And it is combined with forced annual leave, so they basically don't have a choice when they use their annual leave, because when there is no orders, they are just sent to annual leave. And we detected some repressions against collective bargaining and independent unionism. Another big issue in line with overtime is the poverty wages. So you can see the graph, I hope, a little bit. So those darker parts are those that we detected. So you see that the lowest wage is even smaller than the legal minimum wage, and it happens during the low season. But when on paper they receive the legal minimum wage, but in fact they don't. And the average wage in outside the high season is slightly more than the legal minimum wage at 96 euros. During high seasons have a little bit better wage, but again it's only 117 euros. And all of all, like the average wage outside high season is 5 times smaller than the decent wage, which we also tried to calculate based on their responses, how much they would need to spend during the months. So the highest figure is this decent wage. So how do how do these people survive? I won't go into details, but just briefly. So working at least 40 hours per week, workers still have to support themselves by producing on their fields. So they usually do it in their free time, during weekends, during their annual leave, because otherwise it will be hard to survive. Producing for Western brands, workers often buy the same brand clothes, but in second-hand shops imported from Europe. And it's like a classical picture, which is kind of paradox and sad irony you see here. And another, one of the most important things is life of these workers producing for rich Western brands is subsidized by Ukrainian state in different forms, in forms of pension, in forms of subsidies for public utilities, in forms of relatively cheap public transportation subsidized from local budget. So what I'm turning to I will skip this, in terms of theoretical concept. So I'm trying to understand and to explain why these workers still do not protest in these conditions. So first of all, because of poor conditions of the economy, they are afraid to lose their jobs. They're afraid to fall into informality, because no matter how how low their wages are, they are still regular. They have the social package, so they will have pension at some point. And here comes the contradictory role of the state, that because it subsidizes the survival of these workers, this subsidy in forms of social package, it binds them basically to the factory, because they're afraid to fall into this huge informal sector. And so they are afraid to protest, they're afraid to try collective bargaining, and so on. And at the same time, this very low benchmark of the legal minimum wage helps to keep the labor cheap in the country. There is a horizontal stratification of the production, because it's global supply chain they're working in. And because Ukrainian factories are often not even the direct suppliers of the brands, workers sometimes they don't even know whom they're producing for. And basically they don't understand that they can make bargaining with brands, and sometimes they don't even know for which brands they are producing it. It's a huge problem. So there is this fragmentation of workplace, as you see in many Asian countries, when workers don't have like official contracts and so on, or only core workforce has official contract and the rest don't. But there is this horizontal stratification of production. And there is lack of real self-organization, because the existing unions are yellow, and there are repressions against people who try to make independent unions. We detected only 2 cases of this. There probably are more, but not too many, because because of this market conditions. People are already not willing and cannot organize and self-organize, and that's why there is not much to repress. So I think it's basically it. Thank you.